Can I throw a question and get the panel going as far as discussions? We have a situation where human beings are not considered fully human beings until and unless they have documents and are recognized by the constructs we call nation states. Yeah? So this is the problem of nation states. It's not the problem of people. And in 1776 or later, Abraham Lincoln said people of, for, and by the people. And we do not have it yesterday. The world of, for, and by the people. We have the law, the world of international law that justify its origin and existence on the economic and political and cultural genocides of native peoples around the world. And yet we are conditioned like Pavlovian creatures to respond and respect and revere international law. How would you respond to this challenge?
I would say that, interesting question, certainly. I would say that some 2 or 3 things. First, identity is a dynamic process. And identity is, there's a very interesting work by Benedict Anderson about identity, that the nations are called imagined communities. So identity is a dynamic process. And the problem, Gian Antonioni told that the problem is, and it is an interesting challenge to the lawyers, that sometimes the lawyers used to think that what they define should be the reality. But the reality is there, even if it is dynamic. The reality is there before and beyond the legal definitions. And that was a huge problem in the philosophy of law. There are different schools that what happened when the reality you define is too different than the different realities that are happening. And that's why I think that there is a need to a kind of dialogue and debate from the people, from the civil society with the tools of the law, trying to change those tools a bit more similar to these dynamic processes. So I think in that way, experience like different tribunals of opinion, particularly the permanent people's tribunals, were very, I wouldn't say effective, but in these cases they were, but at least useful to challenge this system of international or even national law to adapt to the current situations. But I think that the main thing is not to accept that the definition from the law, it should be the situation in our history, because that could be a kind of path to psychosis, in which that you are talking about a reality that doesn't exist and only exists in your documents, but then you have the reality in which we live.
Yes, I think that I think perhaps Gianni's paper to finish this panel has been very interesting because it's breaking open the limitations that the international legal system has put upon us, like blinkers on the side of a horse, that you can't go here and you can't go there. So the idea that the people actually can make a moral judgment and an assertion and call something by its name, as Gianni said, I think is a critical point. And for us in Cambodia, I rather wish we had come to the Permanent People's Tribunal somewhat earlier, because in Cambodia, what happened was always called genocide in Cambodian, and all of the efforts through the 70s, late 70s, 80s, and so forth to call it by its name and to say that what happened was a crime were completely stymied and stopped interpretations. Oh, sorry, it's not. It can't be done. It can't be done. And the overthrow of that regime was condemned by many as illegal under international law. And yet there were regimes are being overthrown every day. Let's face it. When the people do uprise, some apparently are okay, especially if certain powers become involved militarily in overthrowing some regime. That's acceptable, but something else is not acceptable. So I think the concept that we can indeed work systematically and responsibly to document and to assist people who have no voice to come forward is I think the dynamic that we're seeing here today that is so important, and not to say it can't be done.
Very short observation. Yes, of course. I mean, I stay in an uncomfortable position because I am the positive lawyer among this bunch. But yes, of course. I mean, international law has been established as a kind of very special, I would say, very exclusive club. So this is the origin of the international law. If you want to read something about it, there is a fundamental masterpiece, essays written by Marty Koskiniemi, which is International Law as the Gentle Civilizer of Nations. This is the name of the essay. So really, international law is the gentle civilizer of nations. This is the origin. But there is also some kind of paradox, because if you have a problem, you call the international law. So how can we manage a little bit these two different aspects? It's clear that some experience as the Permanent People Tribunal has nothing to do in formal way with international law, which is a great opportunity, because the subject is not the states, is the people, are the people, so it's completely different. And I really believe in this alphabetization, I would say, this kind of pedagogical theater in which you can put in a free movement the actors and let them the space to say whatever they want. Otherwise, for instance, about the length of the historical and social process, if you take, for instance, the first phrase, the really beginning of the first chapter of the social contract by Rousseau, it was written in 1762. The first sentence is, man is born free and everywhere is in chain, is exactly the same sentence that you can find in the first article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That means 184 years later. So that's a little bit the spirit, the movement in which we have to move forward. That's all. Thanks.
Gentleman in blue shirt.
What are the key elements of identity?
What are the key elements of an identity? I think
Can you repeat your question?
let him.
What are the key elements of identity?
There are huge discussions about which are the key elements, but I would say that identity is the common belief in a community. That's and the possible common practices in the common tradition. There is no way. That's why I have said that identity is a dynamic process and uses to change. So there is no way to deny the identity from outside of a group. It is a way to dehumanize the people. When you are saying that the people who believe they are a community, it is not. Because the only difference among different identities is how old was the process of this creation or recreation. So sometimes, that's why I have said sometimes the law start a process which is impossible to follow. For example, with the discussion in Rwanda, if the Hutus or Tutsis are ethnic identities or national identities or social identities or economic, it depends how long are you going back. But it is the same even with ancient identities like the Jews. That yes, it is true, the Jews has 3,000 or even 4,000 years, but in the beginning it was the same process. It was a creation of identity from different groups that share a belief of a community. So the only difference is how long was the process. So I would say that the identity is a process that only can be defined from the perspective of the persons. The second problem is that then you have, in some processes, perpetrators who create identities that don't exist. So in that process, it is also important that even if the people don't believe they are subversives, if they are subversives for the perpetrators, they constitute a group and they have that identity because they are killed, because they are perceived as this group. So I would say that that's the two main ways to understand identity. On the one way, you can't deny the identity of a group that believes in its own identity. On the other hand, you have to take into account that even if that group don't believe in its identity, you should take into account in an analysis, particularly of a genocidal social process, the mind of the perpetrator, because it is fundamental to understand why they are killing some people beyond their own ideas.
I think following and agreeing closely with Daniel was saying, in the other time, I think that also take into account the context where we are discussing, which is, say, international law. The answer depends on who is asking the question. The identity is not something which exists on one side. The identity is a kind of relationship, because if you, as Daniel was saying, if you declare that the category of terrorist does exist, you invent an identity of terrorism. But if you invent, as it is the case for a non-typical case of genocide, the category that you are a violator of the financial interest of the international community, you create a non-human being, a collective non-human being, which is, for instance, the people of Greece. I don't know whether you have seen, by profession, being a medical doctor and looking for that, one of the most important journals in the medical field, The Lancet, published here nearby, they published a report on the results of the recipe prescribed by the International Monetary Fund and the Troika in Europe on the population of Greece. Greece has an identity of being a people which exist with some basic right, constitution, something like that. Good. The results of this recipe, which involved also, for instance, the denial that Greece was something which has to do with the Western culture, something. Finland was offering to buy the Parthenon to decrease the debt, but in practice they imposed a debt denying the human characteristic of that population. So the basic identity. Why? Because they simply destroyed, they forbidden the application of fundamental right to health, education, alimentation, and then they increased in 2 years the death of children, which also in numerical terms coincide with the genocide. Now, who is judging that? Those children killed by a decision of the IMF. What was their identity? they were children born by play of chance or by in a situation where it was forbidden to be born because the cost of your survival was too heavy for the country. But it was not too heavy, it was judged too heavy with respect to the timing of the debt payment for that. So we are in fact dealing in real life with real people, human beings, which have to do that. Exactly the same which happened in the conquest of America, where the fact of not being converted could be equal to, or the slaves. So the international law, when they are discussing about identity, don't take into account the history which could express itself in a language, words, which are not the same which are recognized by the international community. In that sense, it's important to make a language of communication and identity, where you cannot say, and we were back from the Sri Lanka case for the terrorism, the fact of declaring the Elam Tamil terrorist blocked the peace process which was ongoing. They were not allowed because they were declared terrorists. The same is true for Palestine, or the same could be true for Iraq and the war. So the history is repeating a bit itself in this sense.
More questions, please, from the floor? Yes, please. Can you identify yourself?
Hi, I'm Dan Sullivan with United to End Genocide. Just had a question for Professor Della Morte about the International Criminal Court. And you mentioned the third way that cases can be introduced by the prosecutor. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how that process works. Are there any recent examples where the prosecutor has initiated an investigation?
So the prosecutor, in fact, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court could open an investigation on the basis of some information that could come from everywhere. Even if you want to establish something like a white book or a black book with all the indication of the crimes and every circumstances, and after you want to send it to The Hague, someone will pick it up, your book, your information, and collect it and analyze it. But there is a problem, maybe, which probably I was not clear before. There are some preconditions in the case in which the International Criminal Court works outside from the framework of an authorization by the Security Council of the United Nations. And that this problem is linked of the question of the territory or of the citizen of the accused. That means that if you want that the prosecutor could act proprio motu, that means with its own initiative to open an investigation, you need to prove that the crime has been done within the territory of a state party of the International Criminal Court, of the treaty that established the International Criminal Court, or alternatively by one of the citizens of a state that have ratified the treaty of the International Criminal Court. And you could not escape from these two preconditions because these preconditions have been established into the Rome Treaty. You can read the article 12 and 14 and 15 of the Rome Statute. And that's it. So for until the moment in which the Myanmar would ratify the International Criminal Court Treaty, and I'm not sure that Myanmar would really ratify the International Criminal Court Treaty, you cannot really act or work for an open investigation for the prosecutor. You can maybe try to make some pressure to the Security Council, but the Security Council is really a politically motivated executive organ, so it's quite difficult to work with it. I've been clear? Fine.
Yes, please. Can you stand up and identify yourself, please?
My name is Gurupran. I'm a PhD in law candidate at UCL. My question is to both Professor Daniel and legal expert. In terms of the Genocide Convention's definition of genocide itself and the Rome Statute's reference to genocide, I was wondering whether there was any appetite within the international community, the international legal community, in updating the Genocide Convention to reflect the modern sort of understanding of genocide. It's been more than 50 years since the enactment of the Genocide Convention. And if so, whether there is any appetite at all, and if so, from which quarters we could expect any movement towards updating the Genocide Convention's understanding of genocide.
You want to speak
Because
first?
the problem was
For you both.
Yeah.
For you both.
for both. Maybe
Yeah,
you
you
can.
go
ask.
You first?
No, please.
Daniel first?
Yeah, but I couldn't hear.
What is the,
Yeah,
so what is the
Yes.
possibility for updating?
yeah. I'm not very optimistic about the possibility of revision, but it is why to understand it is the same with the International Criminal Court, that it is a kind of fight between what the societies and the peoples can do and what the state, which is the power, like to do. So the Genocide Convention was a kind of trap. It was a tricky convention. Why? Because explicitly excludes the main, or I would say the only reason for genocide, which is the political motivation. So if you are particularly restrictive, no process would be genocide, because all the processes has political motivation, unless you have judges able to interpret in a different way the convention, that it was the case in many historical situations. It is the same with the International Criminal Court, and as Gabriel explained, the main genociders, particularly the members of the Security Council, the US, Russia, China, are not part of the UK, yes. They are not part of the treaty, so it is a kind of justice for the weak states, in which if they are going to commit some genocide, so they could be judged, unless they're going out of the statute, so they couldn't be judged. So it's, again, a kind of trap. So saying that, I would say we have to continue fighting in this process, because it is true that in some historical situation, it was possible to judge at least some perpetrators. It was possible to confront some genocidal social practices, but it was not because we had the right legal tool. It was because a long process of fighting from the civil society to be able to use these legal tools in ways in which they were not allowed to be used. So I would say, of course, we have to continue fighting in the possibility to revise the Genocide Convention, but maybe it would be, and the case of Argentina is this case, it would be more useful to interpret the Genocide Convention and to use the window of opportunity of some mistakes that the convention did, mistakes in our favor. For example, the inclusion of the national group as one of the 4 groups, and the Argentine interpretation of the Genocide Convention in some trials was that in any case of genocide, you have a partial destruction of the own national group of the society. So and that interpretation would allow you to use the Genocide Convention to judge real genocides. Yeah? And it was the process, but it was not only a question of who is interpreting better the law, but if there is enough will to do and enough strength to do this kind of fight against impunity or for justice.
Gabriel, you want to say?
Yeah. Very short word, but yeah, I mean, this is strange because in some ways you are searching for a legal reason, I mean, a legal qualification of something, but I mean, genocide is just a word. If you read, for instance, the personal diary of Raphael Lemkin, which is the inventor of the word genocide, he wrote in his personal diary, I'm searching for a word like Kodak. Kodak, that was a very famous word during the 30 and 40 years of the last century. It is the noise of the camera, of the analogical camera. That's Kodak. It's an onomatopoeic word. And Lemkin wrote, I'm searching for a word which is very similar to genocide, something which is very easy to understand, and I don't need to translate in different language. Genocide, it comes from Latin and Greek, from genus, which is a Greek word, and ekideo, side, which comes from the Latin language. Genocide. The first dictionary that recognized genocide in the world was the Encyclopédie Larousse, that, if I well remember, recognized the word in 52. And if always I well remember, the English word genocide, the English version of the word, was recognized in the section Abunda and Corrigenda of the Oxford Dictionary, third edition in 55. So it's a very recent word. I mean, don't feel limited by the genocide as a legal or a substantive norm. The Genocide Convention is quite difficult to apply in concrete because it requires that the domestic jurisdiction is founded, is established just in the case in which the material conduct of the genocide is accomplished into the territory of the states in which you want to operate. Or alternatively, you can ask for an application of genocide in front of the International Criminal Court, but once again, we have the problem of the International Criminal Court. But I don't think that you really need to reason in legal terms if you want to fight some kind of if you want to establish a political fight on the topic of the recognition of some kind of prosecution. So my suggestion is just feel free to move either outside from the legal framework.
Thank you. I'm going to call this section to a close because we're already 5 minutes. I'm sorry. We're already 10 minutes late. And so if we would break just for 10 minutes and come back and be seated by, say, like 11:20, that will be much appreciated. Thank you. Let's give the panel a round of applause.